Closer.
We now come to urgent question. Shadow Minister Lynn Brown.
Grateful, Madam Deputy Speaker, to ask the Deputy Foreign Secretary if he'll make a statement on the government's response to atrocity risks in Fasher Sudan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, yesterday we published a written ministerial statement outlining our grave concern at reports of devastating violence in and around Fasher, with civilians caught in the crossfire. In April, the UK-led negotiations alongside Mozambique, Sierra Leone and Algeria at the UN Security Council to deliver a press statement urged the warring parties to de-escalate in Fasher and to comply with their obligations under international humanitarian law. We also called for a closed UN Security Council consultation on the situation. On the 2nd of May, Deputy Foreign Secretary Minister Mitchell publicly called upon the RSF and the ASF to protect civilians and spare Sudan from their willful destruction and carnage. We continue to pursue all diplomatic avenues to achieve a permanent ceasefire, and we welcome plans to restart talks in Jeddah. We urge the region to refrain from actions that prolong the conflict and to engage positively with peace talks. We have used exchanges with the warring parties to condemn strongly atrocities they have perpetrated and to demand that their leadership makes every effort to prevent further atrocities in territories they have captured or threatened to capture, as well as to press the need for improved humanitarian access. On the 15th of April, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Deputy Foreign Secretary announced a package of sanctions designations, freezing the assets of 3 commercial entities linked to the warring parties, and we will continue to explore other levers that we have to disrupt and constrain the sources of funding that both warring parties are using to sustain themselves. We continue to support the Centre for Information Resilience, who document, preserve and share evidence of reported atrocities so that their perpetrators can in due course be brought to justice. There will be no impunity for human rights abusers. Finally, we will keep working to ensure that the voices of Sudanese civilians are heard, whether they be survivors and witnesses of human rights abuses, Sudanese NGOs, women's rights organisations, activists helping in their communities, or those trying to develop a political vision for Sudan's future. UK technical and diplomatic support has been instrumental in the establishment of the anti-war, pro-democracy Takwadam coalition led by former Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok, and we will continue to support Takwadam's development. Thank you.
Shadow Minister Lynn Brown.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. More than 1 million civilians are under immediate threat of massacre in Fasher. The opposition have been calling attention to the risks for several weeks. RSF plans have been slowed due to pressure from the UN, our diplomats and the United States, but that offensive is happening now and at full pelt. We need the international partners with the most influence over the RSF to use their power now and stop the ongoing mass atrocities in Fasher. Every state must surely recognise that the ongoing collapse of Sudan into anarchy and famine is against their best interests, because the general's war against the people of Sudan is a blight on humanity. The US have set out a red line promising, and I quote, direct and immediate consequences for those responsible for an offensive on Fasher. How will the government back that position? We need more pressure put both on the warring parties towards an immediate ceasefire and humanitarian access. We need the government to consider all serious and rapid options for civilian protection. And I genuinely believe that we need to be supporting the resistance committees and emergency rooms. The Deputy Foreign Secretary is a good man who genuinely understands what's at stake. But the opposition expects the UK's collective voice to be heard loud and clear at this time, in the very hours when this atrocity is underway. So how will the government act to protect civilians and ensure that our horror and anger is properly heard?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Lady for her questions and indeed her commitment to continuing to keep this appalling situation firmly on the global radar. Madam Deputy Speaker, in April the UK led negotiations at the UN Security Council, delivering a press statement which urged the warring parties to de-escalate and to comply with their obligations under international humanitarian law. And as I said, we have called for a consultation in private to be able to move this forward. The Deputy Foreign Secretary on the 2nd of May called on the RSF and ASF to protect civilians and spare Sudan from their willful destruction. We will continue to do all we can to bring a sustainable end. We are, of course, continuing to work with a wide range of countries and bodies, including Gulf and African partners, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, the African Union and the UN to achieve this ceasefire, and at the same time, and most importantly, of course, increasing that much-needed humanitarian assistance and access and to protect those civilians. We will continue to lead on the UN Security Council, where we hold the pen on Sudan. And on, of course, the 8th of March, the UNSC adopted a UK-drafted Ramadan ceasefire resolution, which at that point called for an immediate cessation of hostilities.
SNP spokesperson Allan Dorans.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and good morning. Madam Deputy Speaker, we are in a crucial moment of atrocity prevention in Sudan right now. The UK Government must accept that what is happening is genocide. The UK Government has been very proactive in the delivery of aid and food to the civilians of Sudan. How are they reacting to the growing numbers of Sudanese civilians facing famine and starvation? And what protections are in place to ensure that more people aren't driven to catastrophic levels of hunger?
Madam Deputy Speaker, the challenge particularly around food security is at the heart of the most urgent humanitarian work, and the recent IPC projection for Sudan indicates that the intense conflict and organised violence has driven nearly 18 million people into high levels of acute food insecurity. So we provided £42.6 million in humanitarian funding last financial year. Of this, £12.2 million was destined for UNICEF, for those life-saving nutritional activities, and approximately £23.5 million for the Sudan Humanitarian Fund for a multi-sector response, which of course includes a high proportion of food security interventions.
Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The ongoing and developing crisis in Sudan is being fuelled by weapons from foreign supporters who continue to flout the UN arms embargo on Darfur. So how is the government utilising its position as penholder on Sudan at the UN Security Council to prevent the flow of arms to the rapid support forces?
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Lady raises an incredibly important question. Of course, there is a long-standing UK arms embargo in place for the whole of Sudan, as well as a UN arms embargo on Darfur, and we will continue, as I say, to use all our diplomatic tools that we have at the UN Security Council and with international partners to continue to highlight this. As the Deputy Foreign Secretary has said, there are now clear signs of ethnic cleansing in Darfur, and that continued flow of weapons allows them to continue that threat for longer than we want. So we will continue to press in that area.
Andrew Rosendale, standing Ripon.
Deputy Speaker, I thank the Minister for making her statement this morning, and our heart goes out to all those who are being tragically ethnically cleansed from parts of Sudan. But bearing in mind our historical connections with that part of the world, will the Minister tell us what direct action His Majesty's government will be taking, working with the United States, the United Nations, the African Union and others, to ensure the safety, particularly of Christians who are being murdered and forced out of their homes at this time? Surely it's time for Britain to show leadership.
Minister.
Madam Speaker, my honourable friend raises such an important and difficult challenge, and we continue to work closely, of course, with a wide range of NGOs and UN partners on conflict atrocity prevention and these really important questions around religious losses of freedom. We are prioritising systematically around atrocity monitoring and reporting, and we are continuing to increase our capacity around human rights and atrocity prevention investment. We want to be completing that assessment in country in order to inform how we can continue to expand the strategy and be very clear that all those who are committing these terrible crimes will be held to account.
Chion Wara.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The potential scale, the actual scale of the humanitarian situation in Al-Fasher is horrific and demands urgent action. At the same time, Sudan is at the centre of a series of interlocking and interdependent humanitarian crises which blight the whole Horn of Africa. Now, last week, the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Africa, which I share, convened a high-level summit to look at the issues of resilience and conflict in the Horn of Africa, and highlighted particular issues around engagement with grassroots groups and the increasing ethnic polarisation. Now, the Minister is here on behalf of the Deputy Minister, but the Deputy Foreign Secretary. Can she commit on his behalf to meeting with the All-Party Parliamentary Group? The Minister is a friend of the All-Party Parliamentary Group, to discuss these incredibly important actions that the British government can take.
Madam Speaker, I'm sure that I can, in his absence, afford his diary secretaries the opportunity to find a slot. But importantly, I hope that the APPG, which will be doing incredibly important work scanning across the range of channels, have the opportunity to meet with Alison Blackburn, who is our UK Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa, Sudan and the Red Sea. We ask her to do that incredibly important work from there. It has been impossible to have a Special Envoy within Sudan, but she is a great advocate and indeed experienced, so I will try to assure that that meeting can be brought to bear as soon as possible.
Jim Shannon.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank the Minister very much for her answer. Would the Minister outline what further steps government can take when we understand that the elderly, the ill, those who are ill-equipped, the disabled civilians are taking to the streets in an attempt to stand against these paramilitaries and protect their hospitals and vulnerable, and yet without aid? It is not a question of when the city falls, but or if the city falls, but indeed when the city falls. So how can we put medical aid and support to those hospitals and to those vulnerable people at this very important time? Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the honourable member for Strangford highlights what we know one of the most difficult things to watch is the challenges of getting that relevant humanitarian access where it's needed. The current access in Sudan does remain highly constrained, Port Sudan being the primary entry point for relief supplies, and onward distribution from there is continuing to prove challenging, and of course movement is limited. But the investments we made and of course the relationships that we use and all our diplomatic tools, we continue to work on finding ways to support those most vulnerable.
Dame Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I congratulate my honourable friend for securing this urgent question? Nearly 100 humanitarian groups in Sudan have warned Elon Musk that he risks collectively punishing millions of Sudanese by shutting down his vital Starlink satellite internet service in the war-ravaged country. So can the Minister just tell the House, has the government raised our concerns about the devastation that that would cause to civilians and humanitarian aid agencies?
Madam Deputy Speaker, the challenges of having those communication lines open is one that will absolutely be raising real concerns, and I will happily take that up with the Deputy Foreign Secretary when he gets back.
John McDonnell.
Those of us who have constituents of Sudanese origin can relate to the Minister the distress and concern that there is in that community. There is particular concern. I think the estimate now is anything between 500,000 and 1 million refugees going from Darfur into Chad. Could the Minister explain what support we're providing for those who are in Chad? Because at the moment it looks as though those agencies that are there at the moment are unable to cope.
Minister.
The Right Honourable raises a very important point, and I can update him that the Deputy Foreign Secretary has recently been to the Chad-Sudan border to see for himself exactly as the Honourable Gentleman identifies this flow, but really his words, not mine, the sheer horror and misery that these appalling acts have created, and he is very focused on ensuring that we use our humanitarian aid to think about how we can support across every part of this terrible situation.
Andrew Gwynn.
Thank you. I intend no disrespect to the Minister, but the Government's response just does not seem to be as robust as it could be, given the severity of the situation in Sudan. It is horrific. She will have read reports in The Guardian about children, alive children, being piled up and shot by RSF paramilitaries in El Genia. What mechanisms is the Government considering to prevent this genocide from spreading to El Fasher?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as the Honourable Gentleman highlights, this is an appalling situation, and as I just highlighted from the Deputy Foreign Secretary's visit, the sheer horror and misery that is being wrought upon these innocents across the area is absolutely beyond words. As I say, there are now very clear signs of ethnic cleansing and appalling humanitarian abuses, and we are in our support for that gathering of evidence going to try to continue to ensure and support those on the ground, be that through the NGOs or indeed civilians gathering information to make sure that they who are committing those atrocities will be held to account.
Stuart C. MacDonald.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As I understand it, previous regional efforts to agree on deployment of a peacekeeping force in Sudan were rebuffed last year, but I find it incredibly hard to see how ever-escalating atrocity and indeed catastrophe can be avoided without one. So is that even on the agenda now? Because otherwise it seems to me what we're talking about here is not so much atrocity prevention as atrocity monitoring.
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as I say, recent meetings at the UN Security Council continue to raise this, and those decisions on how to move forwards in order to provide protection for the innocents is one that will be taken through the international partners.
Olivia Blake.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. With thousands of women being killed in this war, the catastrophic humanitarian crisis particularly impacting women, and women comprising over 70% of internally displaced people in Sudan, what measures is the Government taking to protect women in El Fasher?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Lady raises a really important and incredibly worrying situation. Women and girls are at particular risk of a significant escalation in gender-based violence. In July last year, the UK and 15 other members of the International Alliance on Preventing Sexual Violence and Conflicts published a statement urging all parties to prevent violence, particularly sexual violence, and to ensure immediate humanitarian access. This issue continues to be at the front of the Deputy Foreign Secretary and all our team's minds as we have pivoted our bilateral programme delivery to ensure that women and girls are at the heart of the support that we're providing.
I thank the Minister for answering the urgent question.